Welcome back, students. This is Module 4.3.3, Evolutionary Concepts. This module will touch upon a variety of concepts that flow out of Darwin's main idea. We're going to start by talking about the concept of gene pool. A gene pool consists of all of the genes of one particular population. And so in this case, we're using javelina as an example of gene pool, and each individual javelina is born and dies with the same genes, but it is how successfully that each survives and reproduces that determines the composition of the gene pool of the next generation. And so they're contributing alleles if they survive and reproduce, and if they don't, then their alleles are removed from the gene pool. And a gene pool is a population feature, and you should recall that it is populations and gene pools that evolve, not the genotypes of individuals. So when we talk about change in the genetic structure of a population, we're typically talking about the genetic structure of the gene pool. Another important idea is that evolution doesn't produce mutations to meet what a particular organism needs. Natural selection doesn't produce more heat-tolerant mutations if the environment's getting hotter. What natural selection does is it selects for the variations that are available. And so we don't see beavers that have chainsaws on their forearms because that's not the way it works. And so it's important to recognize that mutations and variations occur randomly. And once they randomly occur, they may be selected for or they may be selected against by natural selection, depending upon the conditions in that particular place and time. And over many generations, mutations will shape the adaptations that each lineage has, and it enables each lineage to come to match the environment. Now, Darwin's idea was really an amazing one, and it was able to account for both the diversity and the unity of life, and it does provide this framework of modern biology that virtually all aspects of modern biology are dependent upon. One of the architects of the new synthesis, which you may recall, was the bringing together of the works of the two pillars of modern biology as I've presented them, Gregor Mendel and Charles Darwin. Because Darwin didn't know mechanism of genetics, we had to reconcile his work with Mendel's. And one of the people that did that was Theodosius Dobzhansky. He has a very famous quote about evolution. He says, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." And that really is the way that modern biology is framed. Darwin's idea, evolution by natural selection, explained the mechanism of adaptation. It explained why plants and organisms in cold climates were adapted for cold, and organisms that lived in the water were adapted for an aquatic existence, et cetera, et cetera. And so the match between a lineage of organisms and an environment is explained by Darwin's idea. And the theory of evolution has really withstood the test of time. There's no truly contradictory evidence in over 150 years since the idea was brought to light. And this idea also explains the occurrence of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. You should be able to apply the principles of natural selection, evolution by natural selection, to explain how bacteria become resistant to antibiotics. I do want to bring up two important concepts, and these are concepts of scale. And one is microevolution. A microevolution is considered small changes of the gene pool within a population or species. This is adaptation, how a particular lineage comes to match its environment. So that's microevolution. Macroevolution are larger changes in the genetic structure of a population that may lead to new species, speciation. Now, Charles Darwin had a nice way of conveying this information. He said Darwin regarded micro and macroevolution as differences of degree and not differences of kind. So it was kind of the same thing, just taken to a greater extent. That was macroevolution compared to microevolution. And so a good analogy would be microevolution is walking to the corner and macroevolution is walking to Tucson. I guess Darwin's point was that regardless of the distance you travel, you're still walking. Now, a very important aspect of this is the explanation of adaptation. So natural selection does lead to adaptation. So we have cactus in the desert and cattails in marshes. And so we can define an adaptation, define adaptation as the development of heritable traits that enables a population to survive and reproduce better in its current environment. And of course, adaptation is one manifestation of microevolution. And there are several examples that I want to share with you. Things like cryptic coloration, so that an organism is hidden in its environment. And I might ask you the question, what sort of organism wants to be hidden? Is it a predator or is it a prey? And the answer is both. And the prey wants to hide from the predator wants to hide from the prey. And so we see cryptic coloration in a number of different lineages. We also see mimicry. Mimicry is when a harmless species will come to resemble a harmful species and thereby derive some protection. So let's look at some examples of cryptic coloration. And we could have gone through a lot more examples than this, but we just want to show you them. Okay, here in the lower left, of course, you can see a horned lizard, and some people call them horny toads, but they're not toads, they're lizards, and so it's better to call the horned lizard. Toad is, of course, an amphibian with a smooth skin, and they reproduce in water, and horned lizards are reptiles. But regardless, you can see its flat, wide body with kind of a fringed outline to break up its outline, helps it to blend in. And if you've been walking across the floor of the desert, one of these will suddenly run when you almost step on it. Otherwise, they hold very still. They're quite difficult to see, truly. A second example of cryptic coloration is a leaf mimic insect. This is a orthopteran, which is a relative of a grasshopper. Here we can see the eye, and there's the antenna, and there's one leg, two leg, three legs on this left side. Then we can see the wing that looks like a leaf. To great detail, it looks like it has a midrib, and it has veins. Even looks like the leaf is broken there. Really quite tremendous. And some of these leaf mimics, it's not only the form or the anatomy that's been adapted, but also the behavior. So when the wind blows and all the leaves are blowing, the leaf mimic insect will also blow with the other leaves or move with the other leaves. It's really quite convincing. Another leaf mimic insect here, this is in the mantis group, and we can see that if it also is a leaf mimic, we take away the green background, we can really see how amazing the mimicry is. And you should be able to use those 4 steps of Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection to explain how an insect could come to resemble a leaf using those 4 steps. So think about it. You don't have to look very much more like a leaf for it to be an advantage and to be selected for. And so that's all it requires, is to start on that path. Let's look at another example of cryptic coloration. This is, in fact, almost impossible to see. Right here is the eye at the point of this, the pointer here, the eye of an octopus. And this is an octopus. Of course, octopuses are cephalopods, and they are capable of great feats of changing color to match a substrate. I've even seen one do a decent job of resembling a checkerboard pattern. So they're quite amazing and chameleon-like in that way. Here is an insect, or actually an insect larva that looks like a twig. It's here, and it even looks like it has a little bud on the tip of the twig, but of course it's going to grow up to be a moth. And there are other insect larvae. There's one family of moths. They're called the bird-dropping caterpillars, and they look like little bird turds. Why would a caterpillar want to look like a bird turd? Because birds don't eat turds. And here's an example of a bird turd caterpillar. This is such a caterpillar, quite amazing. Let's look at mimicry. Mimicry is another manifestation of adaptation. So mimicry, you'll recall, is when a harmless species looks like a harmful one, and thereby derives some degree of defense. And so I'm going to show you paired examples, paired photographs, and in each example, the animal on the left has a defense, and the one on the right is a harmless mimic. And so let's take a look. First, we can see on the left, this is a bumblebee and it stings. On the right, this is a fly that has black and yellow and a fuzzy body and looks a lot like a bumblebee, but has no sting. It's completely harmless in that regard. Here's another pair. On the left is a venomous coral snake, an Arizona coral snake, and on the right is a Sonoran mountain king snake. And if you were in the Scouts, you might know that red and yellow, kill a fellow, describes the coral snake, the coloration of the coral snake, and red and black, my friend Jack, describes the king snakes and the milk snakes. And so you can tell the difference between the venomous ones. You can't tell necessarily by the color of the tip of the nose. For example, the California king snake, California mountain king snake, has a black tip nose, as does a coral snake. Yeah, the Sonoran mountain king snakes, the ones we have here in the Huachucas, have a white tip nose. But again, that's not universally true. So just use red and black and red and yellow, and you'll be in good shape there. Very interesting. Another pair on the left is a monarch butterfly, and on the right is a viceroy. The monarch butterfly's caterpillars eat milkweed, which contains chemicals called cardiac glycosides that increase the heart rate and cause vomiting. And so this is a pretty good defense. And the viceroy on the right, its larvae don't eat milkweed. They don't have cardiac glycosides. And you can tell the difference if you look at the hind wings. Right here, there's a line on the hind wings of a monarch, on the hind wings of a viceroy, and the monarch lacks such lines on its hind wings. Let's look at one more example here. On the left, we see a very fierce member of the weasel family. This is a family to which weasels and skunks and wolverines belong. This is called a honey badger. It lives in Africa. It's very fierce. And on the right is a baby cheetah. And people who saw baby cheetahs, they thought, oh, it has this coloration to look like it, to camouflage it in the grass. And it may do that as well, but the dark underneath actually helps it to resemble a honey badger to some extent. This is one of the few examples of mimicry in mammals that is known. I read this as a note in the Journal of Mammalogy, and it's a little more controversial than the others, which are very solid. And this one, it's an interpretation and may or may not be so. Let's look at another concept related to Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. And this is fitness. This is an important evolutionary concept. Fitness is a measure of reproductive success. It's the number of genes contributed to the next generation. This is related to the number of viable fertile offspring. So remember, the offspring has to survive, it has to be viable, and it has to be fertile. If you have sterile offspring, it doesn't really increase the fitness of that lineage. Now, if you have no offspring, then your Darwinian fitness would be zero. And I put here unless. Unless what? Unless you have relatives that have offspring because they share half of your genes. For example, on average, your siblings share half of your genes, and so their children will be 1/4 the same genes as you. And so that is a form of fitness as well, because it's the number of genes contributed to the next generation. So the fitness of your family can increase the fitness of an individual as the genes are passed on in the lineage. Of course, fitness results from adaptiveness, how well a lineage is adapted to its environment. Let's look at one more concept, and then we'll end this module. And that concept is convergent evolution. Convergent, of course, the word means coming together. Convergent evolution is defined as evolution of similar adaptations in unrelated organisms in response to similar environmental challenges. Now, this is a matter of scale, and there's some interpretation here, because in fact all life is believed to be related to some extent. So this is a matter of degree, and there, as I say, there's some interpretation. Let me give you some examples to give you an idea. Two examples are two families of plants that are both stem succulents, which means they store water in their stems, cacti and euphorbs, and then two sand-dwelling snakes, sidewinders of the American Southwest, and horned vipers of African deserts. So let's look first at the cacti and euphorbs, succulent plants, stem succulents. On the left is a euphorb, which is a stem succulent in Madagascar. And these stem succulents can grow in various places, but this is where they're large and cactus-like. And here on the right, we see an organ pipe cactus from the deserts of the Southwest. And they're both stem succulents, but if we look at their flower structure, which I don't have here, but they're very different. And that's what botanists would use to determine the family relationship of a particular plant. So it's interesting. They both live in hot, dry deserts, and to adapt, they both store water in their stems. But they're different lineages, and we can see that by the differences in the floral structure. A second example would be snakes that dwell on sand, and on the left we see a sidewinder, and on the right we see a horned viper. And they have similar adaptations. They both have horns over their eyes. The horned viper's horns are much longer. They have valves on their nostrils to keep sand from getting in there. They both have sidewinding locomotion. They both tend to bury themselves in sand and lie in wait for prey to come by. This is, in fact, the tracks of a sidewinder. And if you've ever seen a sidewinder, it's kind of can be disconcerting because they'll be looking away from you and moving right towards you. Not that they're trying to come after you or anything, but it is an interesting thing to observe. And so with this example, we will conclude this module with some variety of important topics that are related to evolution by natural selection.